Scotland, 1893. The lighthouse stands like a white bone on a black rock. Wind comes from every direction at once. The supply boat noses in after 3 days of gales and finds the landing ropes slack, the crane boom cocked the wrong way, and the tower door resting on its latch but not barred. Inside, the lantern is cold. The lamp is trimmed, the wick pinched, the lens wiped to clarity that no one will see. A teapot sits on the iron stove, steamed dry and forgotten. A clock on the stair has stopped at 2:11. The logbook on the desk has 3 neat lines for the night, and then nothing, and then a long white space that feels like a shoreline. The keeper's oilskins are gone, his sea boots are gone, the keeper is gone. The tower is empty. Before we go any further, subscribe and tap the bell. Around here we tell the stories most people would rather forget. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. These cold water mysteries are scattered around every coast. Stay with me to the end. There's one penciled sentence hidden on the back flyleaf of the log that reshapes this case. Names are altered, some records conflict. What follows is built from the Northern Lighthouse Board returns, a Coast Guard report, 3 letters that survived salt air and time, and testimony from a hearing that changed nothing. We will show you what can be known, and the best ideas for the parts that refuse to sit still. They called it Bray Scary Light, one of those low, mean rocks off the northwest coast between Cape Wrath and the Long Dark of Lewis. The Stevenson men had sighted the tower 15 years earlier and poured it from granite blocks with a precision that made the sea look clumsy by comparison. 98 feet of spiral stair, a lantern room walled with crystal prisms, a fog bell that could bruise your chest if you stood too close when it sang. There was no harbour, there was a landier, nang cleft and a crane, and the habit of praying. You arrived and left in the same weather you started with. By rule, 2 men should have been on the rock in winter. In November, the assistant fell ill mid-watch and was carried off on a rare soft day, with orders that a relief would be sent within the week. The weather closed the door and locked it from the outside. The relief stayed ashore. That left 1 man on the tower through a gale season that entered the log as if it meant to live there. The keeper, call him Alistair Kerr, was 40 and sinewed the way rope is sinewed. He had fished before he learned lights, and he had learned lights because the sea can love you and still sell you dear. If you read his earlier pages, you hear a steady hand. He writes like a man counting stones. Lamp lit at 4:06. Wind west by north, force 5. Bell struck, saw smoke to east, trimmed wick at midnight, cleared gull on lantern sill. The handwriting is strong enough to hang from. He had a sister in Ullapool to whom he wrote long, careful letters and never showed the parts where the world tilted. He kept a small leather Bible, not because he believed in words that floated, but because the habit of turning pages calmed his fingers. He was not a man men worried about, until the day they should have. The last week of his life was written as if by 2 different people using the same hand. On the 5th day alone, he notes the fog settling as a great animal would lie down. On the 6th, he writes of the bell line that began to saw the hole in its pulley and sing a new, unwholesome note. On the 7th, he notes lights to south that are not stornaways, and then corrects himself on the next line, heat lightning in cloud. On the 8th, he writes a sentence that might be poetry or might be equipment. The sea is at the door today. The inspector who read those lines later wrote, metaphor Besson, eyed it. Men who do not sleep well mislabel the world. December 17th gave him a break of daylight that looked like hope and was not. He greased the gear for the lantern's clockwork, mended a split in a stair tread, and walked the landing to check the mooring lines, his boots striking sparks you could not see from iron set in stone. The sea had taken the fender off the lower landing and twisted the chain that fixed the crane to its plinth. He wrote, lower chain kinked, will require heat. Heat is the last thing you have on a rock where everything is wet all the time. Night took the horizon and made it local. 4:03 p.m. He lit the lamp and wound the mechanism, the slow, solemn ritual that feels like prayer even if you don't believe in praying. He trimmed the wick at 9 o'clock and again at midnight. At 12:27 he wrote, bell line beating itself to pieces, must ease. At 1:16, wind veered NWW, seas striking level with bell. At 1:37, lantern running true. At 1:58, there is a blot that could be his hand catching a thought that didn't want to be caught. The next line, clean, small, precise, reads, If it rings by itself, do not go. The line after that is a time, 2:11, nothing else. The supply boat made Bray scary at noon through a swell that made men see God, whether they intended to or not. They hailed. No answer. They rang the bell by hand and waited for the keeper's hat to bob on the stairhead. He was a stickler for returns. Nothing. They took the iron ladder on the first lift of a wave and made the landing in a hurry history would call brave. The door to the lower store was shut but not barred. There were no footprints you could trust on stone scoured by spray. Inside, an oil can sat where it should not. The store was tidy except for a coil of hawser that had rolled from its peg. They climbed to the kitchen, teapot on the dry ring, bread heel hard, a chair a little out of line, which would not matter if you did not know the man with Josin, who sat there. The watch clock on the stair had stopped at 2:11. In the lantern room, everything was correct, shutter open, lens clean, lamp cold and trimmed as if for inspection. On the hook by the door, his keyring hung where he left it each night. On the peg where his oilskins hung, emptiness. They searched the rock because men who arrive in a story like this always search the rock, though the rock does not look kindly on their hope. The landing cleft bore the signs of argument, the handline pulled from its anchor, the crane's hook bent like a broken finger, a wetness under the bell that was not water but oil, and a thin shred of cloth caught in a cleat so tight the sea had not yet bothered to take it. It looked like the inside lining of a sleeve. The first lie arrived with the first report to the board. Keeper missing, presumed lost while securing landing rig during gale. It is the kind of sentence the sea has taught institutions to prefer. It honors the dead while excusing the living, and leaves no space for the parts that don't add up. Quick pause. What's your first theory? Rogue wave while he was tending the bell or crane? A misstep after days alone? Something uglier? Smuggling, a boat in the night, and an argument the board preferred not to know? Drop your guess in the comments. I'm pinning the most persuasive one. The inquest a fortnight later gathered in a cold room in Wick. 3 men sat in judgment with pens that scratched like mice. The supply captain gave steady testimony. Door unbarred, lamp cold, stair clock stopped, landing gear damaged, no body. An inspector from the Northern Lighthouse Board spoke about rules and their exceptions, about how 2 men should have been there and 1 was, about weather that makes stubbornness a virtue until it kills you. A Coast Guard bosun with a face like an oar handle said the crane could have spun if the wind shifted and taken a man with it. He demonstrated with hands that had scars where rope had argued with skin and won. A fisherman from Kinloch Bervie said there were brown sails on that coast that did not belong to any man in the tax books, and that lights to south could be what they did when they wanted a man ashore. He was told to answer only what he had seen. He said, steady, I have seen boats that prefer the night, and sat down. Then they read a letter. It had been in the lighthouse drawer with the log and the Bible, addressed but unsent, the way letters to people we love tend to be when the weather closes early. Sister, it began, this is a rough place, but a clean one. It will peel you to what you are. Twice this week the bell spoke wrong. Twice I went out, and twice I learned to distrust that voice. If the bell rings alone, leave it alone. I have been thinking of Father's boat and the men who came after dark to borrow it with no words. I will not keep that company again. Pray, if you pray, that the weather minds its manners. The board entered the letter as an expression of temperament and returned to procedure. It concluded, after a respectful interval, that Keeper Kerr was lost in the execution of his duty, and that in future no light should be left with only 1 man except under necessity. The report did not define necessity. Men who write necessity into rules often leave it for someone else to discover the edges. After the hearing, matters that would not fit in the minutes continued to announce themselves. A tinkerer who had serviced the fog bell mechanism said he had warned the inspector that the pulley at the bell mouth was tired and the line ate it like an animal eats bone. He was told to submit the warning in writing. He had. The paper was not in the file the day of the hearing or any day after. A boy who rowed for a crofter on the mainland said he had seen a boat off Brayskerry 2 nights before the keeper went missing. No riding light, brown patch sail, a single figure in the stern with a coiled rope. He told his mother, who told him to be quiet about the affairs of men who could afford to speak louder than him. And there is the sentence I promised you. On the back flyleaf of the log, under the place where the binding threads tie, written small and lightly in a hand that was careful without being delicate, "If I am not at the light, I am at the landing, and only if someone has come who should not." Let's talk theories, and we'll be honest about what each gives you and what it steals. Rogue wave. The sea is a machine that can lift 1,000 tons as easily as it lifts a weed. A keeper alone hears the bell line flog itself to pieces in a shifting wind. He takes his oilskins and his boots because he is not a fool. He opens the lower door and does not bar it because he believes he will be back in 5 minutes or less. He frees the line, or he does not, and in the moment of relief or frustration, the sea comes higher than it should, flatter than a normal sea, a single slab of water that lifts him clear and takes him out of the landing cleft like a man being released from a promise. The bent crane hook, the torn handline, the sleeve shred, all recommend this version. What does not? The clock on the stair stopping at 2:11 and the lamp left as if ready for inspection. The kind of carefulness men do when they are closing a room, not running from it. A wave is instant. The room reads as collected. Misstep. Loneliness and 3 nights of bad sleep make hands stupid and feet untrustworthy. He takes the oil and the line and goes to the landing and slips on what looks like dry stone and isn't, and the sea completes what gravity began. This theory deserves more respect than it gets. Dignity can vanish faster than hope. Smuggling. Brown sails, the fisherman said, and the letter to his sister speaks of a past debt he had no interest in repaying. A boat comes by habit when the light is manned by men who will look away for a small kindness and a dram, and this keeper is not that kind of man. Words are said on a ladder in the dark to the left of the cleft where only fools stand. A blow is struck. A rope helps a man decide to go from one world to another with more speed than polite society would prefer. The door left unbarred makes a kind of sense here. Men who come to a door do not always wait for it to be opened. What does not sit right? A fight on stone leaves more trace than a strip of cloth, and men who bring trouble prefer to bring it when the keepers are two, because 2 witnesses hold each other, and fear makes better glue than conscience. Desertion. A story as old as boats. A man alone decides his life is the wrong shape. He takes his coat and his boots. He leaves the lamp perfect out of professional pride and slips into a boat he arranged with someone who knows where the rocks do not rise. He vanishes to the south and grows a beard and a new name, and never speaks of lighthouses again. The trouble with this theory is arithmetic the sea insists on. There was no boat. If one launched, someone must have seen its outline against a night that glowed with blown foam. There are places to hide in these waters, but not many, and the coast has a way of reporting the faces that do not belong. Cover-up. The board broke its own rule and left a man in winter alone with a bell whose pulley was tired and a crane that had not been greased since Michaelmas. A death that belongs to maintenance is a death that belongs to a budget. Institutions prefer the sea to do the work of their negligence. The clean lamp and the stopped clock are too theatrical to trust, this theory says. The supply captain Till die-fingered the scene before help arrived. The difficulty here is moral, not factual. You have to imagine men who do a hard job being cold enough to tidy a room around a dead colleague's absence. Some can, not many do. An older theory, which I won't give the dignity of a place on the list, speaks of madness, isolation, a bell that hammers a rhythm into your head, a wind that recites a prayer you didn't consent to learn. Men do break under that, but when they do, they break loud. They leave words like broken glass. They leave rooms in the state storms leave rooms. Kerr's rooms were orderly. He had turned down the place before night. What happened after disappears the way weather does. The board sent a relief and a new keeper, and the new keeper slept badly for a year and learned to keep the bar across the door even when he meant to step out only as far as the bell. The pulley was replaced. The crane was greased. A note was written in the margin of the instructions in a hand that does not match any of the usual hands. Never go out at the bell alone. The sister in Ullapool received the letter they found and wrote back to a man who could not reply. She addressed the envelope to Bray Scary Light, and in the place where the stamp should be, drew a small black square. She kept the envelope on her mantle until the paper took the color of smoke, and then put it in a Bible between Psalms and Lamentations, which is an index no one else would have thought to keep. Years later, a mason sent to repoint the tower near the base found that one of the stair treads, halfway, the place where men stopped to take a breath and look down without meaning to, had 2 screws missing in a way that suggested someone had planned to fix them and hadn't been permitted to finish. The ledger shows a requisition for 4 brass screws denied on the grounds that stores adequate, repair deferred. The tread he held under ordinary feet. A man running could make it speak. You stayed, so here's where I leave you with the same uncomfortable truth I keep finding at the end of these rooms. The distance between a life that continues and a life that ends is sometimes no wider than the width of a rope that should have been replaced and wasn't, or the weight of a word a man chooses to ignore because the speaker is not the sort of person he listens to, or the habit of turning a key that no one remembers to pass along when shifts change. My vote, today, these votes change with weather, is the unhandsome blend that's truer than any single story. A bell line beating itself wrong and calling out a man who knew better and went anyway because the sound was an insult to his craft. A landing cleft that was 1 step more treacherous than it had been the night before. A crane hook that had taken enough blows and did not know how to take one more. And a sea that chooses its moment with a cruelty that is also, if you forgive me, an honesty. I can end you now. I will. There remains that small pencil line on the flyleaf. If I am not at the light, I am at the landing, and only if someone has come who should not. It's not proof. It is a measure of a man's stubbornness, and of his memory of debts he refused to carry forward. I think he kept that promise to himself. I think something came that should not have, whether it was a wave or a sound or a boat with a familiar face, and he went to meet it where the stone narrowed, and there the story ended. If this reached you, subscribe and tap the bell. Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me which theory you choose. Rogue wave, misstep, smuggling, desertion, or cover-up. I'll pin the most persuasive comment and bring whatever new fragments we can pry from archives that prefer their quiet. Next time, we move inland to a highland glen where a missing parish register turned a village's history into a game of shadows. Until then, keep a light on, and if the bell rings by itself, leave it alone.